Hey guys, in this video we'll learn about why JavaScript is called asynchronous programming language and what exactly is the difference between synchronous and asynchronous programming. So without going into much of a theory, we will learn this in a very practical way by writing some JavaScript code into the code editor. So to understand what is synchronous and asynchronous programming, we will start by writing a simple JavaScript function. I'll name this JavaScript function as a test function, and inside this we will write three statements. So it's just three console log statements that we are writing inside this test function, and below this we will call this function. And let's see the output here in the command line. When I save and run this, so I can see that it has printed 1, 2 and 3 in this sequence, in the correct sequence. So first it has executed this statement and the next one and the next one. So from this we can imagine that it is executing the statements in the sequential order. So the statement that is written first is executed, but in this case it is executed in the sequence because none of the statement is taking too much time to execute. Now this kind of if the statements are executed in the sequential order, then we call it a synchronous programming. Now we have seen that in I've written this code in JavaScript. Statements have been executed in the sequential order, but still we call JavaScript as a asynchronous programming language. So why is that? To understand that, let me do a thing. So this is my first statement, and this is my third statement, and this is my second statement. So what I'll do is I'll delay my second statement a little bit. I'll put some delay on my second statement with the help of set timeout function. I'll say that execute this statement in 1 second. So that means that now this statement, the second statement, will take 1 second to execute. So let's save this and let's see what happens in the command line. Now you can see that how it has executed, in which order it has executed this state. It has executed the first statement, then it went to the second statement, but it was taking too long to execute and complete this. So without waiting for this, it has moved on to the next statement, and this is the reason it has printed 1, 3 and 2 in the last, because this statement is taking too long to execute. So this is the reason the JavaScript is called asynchronous programming language, because it does not execute the statements in the sequential order. If any of the statement is taking too long to execute, it just moves on to the next statement without waiting for this to complete. But in other programming languages like Python or any synchronous programming language, these statements will always be executed in the sequential order. Now in JavaScript, does this have any kind of benefit that JavaScript is asynchronous? Yes, it has. For example, if there is a statement which is taking too long to execute, then it moves on to the next statement without blocking the entire code. So let's say we have a web application, and somebody is using that web application and gives a very heavy task to the server to perform from the coding point of view. So in that case, our entire application will not block. It will still keep on running while this statement is being executed on the backend. So that is a benefit of asynchronous programming. But there are many cases where we don't want this behavior to happen in JavaScript. For example, now this statement is taking too long to execute, but still I want that these statements JavaScript should execute in the sequential manner. So in that case, is there something I can do about it? Is there a feature that can help me execute these statements in the sequential order in JavaScript? Yes, there is, and that is called JavaScript promises. So if I want to execute these statements in the sequential order, which JavaScript is not doing by default, because JavaScript is a asynchronous programming language and it's a non-blocking language. It doesn't block the code for the statements that are taking too long to execute. But what if I wanted to wait here until this is completed and then move on to the next statement? There are many cases where we want this behavior to happen. We want this statements to be executed in the sequential manner. So in that case, what comes to our rescue is JavaScript promises. So what I'll do is I'll convert this statement into a promise, and I'll tell the JavaScript to wait for it until this is completed. JavaScript must wait and do not execute this statement. So for that I'll just write a syntax of a promise here. So this is a syntax. So I'll define it as a new promise, and it has two inbuilt functions, resolve comma reject, and inside this promise I'll put this chunk of code. Now I've made this chunk of code as a promise, and inside of this I'll say that once my console log is done, then resolve this promise. Okay, and now what I can do is as of now I've written this console log directly below this statement, but now since I've made this statement as a promise, I'll say that promise dot then, and inside of this I'll write this statement console log. So what exactly I'm doing is I'm telling the JavaScript that execute this promise first, and then when the promise has been executed, then you go ahead and execute my next statement here. So if I save it now you can see it is executing the statements back in the sequential order. But this syntax looks really complicated to understand. So is there any way we can simplify this syntax? Yes, we can. So how we can? Let's delete this. Let me write console log again. So now if I save it, even though we have made it a promise, it is still not executing these statements in the sequential manner, because we haven't told JavaScript to wait for this promise. We need to tell JavaScript to wait for this promise and then execute the last statement. So for that we have seen one of the method. Now there's a second method which is much more simple. We will make this function as a async function, and before this statement I'll say await promise, which means that I'm telling the JavaScript execute my first statement. Then I just defined the promise, which is my second statement. Then I told wait for the promise to complete and then execute my last statement. Now if I save it, now it is again executing the statements in the sequential order. So I hope you got a very basic idea of what exactly is synchronous and asynchronous programming, and how we can make JavaScript to execute our code in the sequential manner, even though it is asynchronous programming language and it doesn't wait for the code to complete in the sequential manner. It just keeps going. So to watch such videos, if you like the content, then subscribe to the channel, and like this video, comment any of your queries in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching.